What would happen if gravity suddenly disappeared? If gravity suddenly disappeared, the consequences would be catastrophic and potentially life-threatening. The force of gravity is what holds everything in our universe together, and without it, objects would no longer be attracted to each other. At the moment that gravity disappeared, all objects, including people and the atmosphere, would be launched into space at high speeds in a straight line, following their previous trajectory. The Earth would no longer be held in its orbit around the Sun and would drift off into space. This would have devastating consequences for life on Earth, as the absence of gravity would disrupt ecosystems and cause widespread destruction. The atmosphere would also be lost, as gravity is what holds it in place around the Earth. This would cause the air to rapidly disperse into space, making it impossible to breathe. The loss of gravity would also cause a rapid drop in temperature as the atmosphere thinned out and heat was no longer distributed around the planet. Overall, the sudden disappearance of gravity would lead to a catastrophic and potentially apocalyptic scenario, as the entire structure of the universe as we know it would collapse. If gravity suddenly disappeared, everything on the Earth and in the rest of the universe would be affected. On Earth, objects would no longer be pulled towards the center of the planet, so they would begin to float away into space. People, buildings, vehicles, and everything else on the Earth's surface would lose their grip on the ground and be thrown into the air. The atmosphere would also disperse into space, leaving the Earth's surface exposed to the vacuum of space. In space, planets, stars, and galaxies would no longer be held in their orbits by the gravitational force. They would drift apart in all directions, and the universe would eventually become a vast and empty expanse with no structure or coherence. It's important to note that gravity is an extremely fundamental force in the universe, and it is impossible to imagine the consequences of its sudden disappearance with complete accuracy. The scenario I described is a rough approximation of what might happen, but the actual consequences could be much more complex and catastrophic. The sudden disappearance of gravity is a hypothetical scenario that is often explored in science fiction, but what would actually happen if gravity were to suddenly vanish in the real world? The consequences would be catastrophic and far-reaching, affecting every aspect of our lives and the entire universe. Gravity is the force that holds everything in the universe together. It is what keeps us on the ground and the planets in their orbits around the Sun. If gravity were to suddenly disappear, everything would be thrown into chaos. One immediate consequence of the disappearance of gravity would be the loss of the Earth's atmosphere. Without gravity, the air molecules that make up the atmosphere would no longer be held in place and would quickly dissipate into space. This would make it impossible for humans and other living organisms to breathe, and life on Earth would quickly come to an end. In addition to the loss of the atmosphere, the disappearance of gravity would also lead to the disintegration of the Earth itself. The internal pressure that holds the Earth's core together is maintained by gravity, so without it, the core would rapidly cool and solidify. This would cause the Earth's magnetic field to collapse, leaving the planet vulnerable to the full force of the solar wind. The crust of the Earth would also begin to break apart, as the tectonic plates that make up the planet's surface would no longer be held together by gravity. This would lead to massive earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, as well as the formation of new mountains and oceans. The disappearance of gravity would also have a profound effect on the other planets in the solar system. The Moon, for example, would no longer be held in its orbit around the Earth and would likely fly off into space. Similarly, the planets would no longer be held in their orbits around the Sun and would begin to move off in random directions. This would likely result in collisions between the planets and other celestial objects. leading to the formation of new asteroids and comets. The loss of gravity would also have a major impact on the way we move and communicate. Without gravity, objects would no longer have weight and would float freely in space. This would make it extremely difficult to move around, as every step or push would cause the person to be propelled in a random direction. This would also make it impossible to communicate, as sound waves would not travel through the vacuum of space. The disappearance of gravity would also have a profound effect on the human body. Our bodies have evolved to function in a gravitational environment, and without it, our muscles and bones would quickly begin to deteriorate. This would lead to a condition known as space atrophy, in which the body loses muscle mass and bone density, and becomes increasingly weak and frail. In summary, the sudden disappearance of gravity would have catastrophic consequences for the Earth and the entire universe. It would lead to the loss of the Earth's atmosphere, the disintegration of the planet itself, the formation of new celestial objects, and the deterioration of the human body. It is important to remember that this scenario is purely hypothetical and unlikely to ever occur, but it serves as a reminder of the importance of gravity in our lives and in the functioning of the universe as a whole.